number 1 is Joseph Mengele. Joseph Mengele was a German officer and physician during World War II. Nicknamed the Angel of Death, he performed deadly experiments on prisoners, where he was a member of the team of doctors who selected victims to die in the gas chambers, and was one of the doctors who administered the gas. One of Joseph's most chilling characteristics was his double-sided facade. He would offer sweets to the young in the camp's kindergarten, then select them as subjects for lethal experimentation. His medical experiments showed no consideration for the victim's health, safety, or physical and emotional suffering. Now, he was particularly interested in identical twins, people with heterochroma iridum, eyes of 2 different colors, dwarfs, and people with physical abnormalities. He conducted forced sterilizations of prisoners, amputated limbs, and injected chemicals in eyeballs, and once sewed Romani twins back to back. After the war, he escaped justice and lived out the rest of his life in Argentina and Paraguay, and he was never held accountable for the atrocious acts he committed. Number 9. Ilya Anovich. Ilya Anovich was a Russian biologist who worked in artificial insemination. Ilya then wanted to get of animals and put it into different species to see what happened. He started off slowly creating a Z-donk from a zebra and a donkey, a rat mouse, a guinea pig mouse, and an antelope and cow. Then in 1910, he told a gathering of zoologists that he thought it could be possible to create a human-ape hybrid, often now referred to as a human Z. Now, his chance finally came after the Russian Revolution of 1917 while working at the Institute Pasteur. It was here in 1924 he was given the opportunity to work on this. In 1926, he and Serge Vonaroff transplanted a human ovary into a chimp before attempting to inseminate her with human sperm. He attempted this 2 more times without success, so he then pitched an alternative approach. Take chimpanzees and implant it into African women without their knowledge or consent. Now, the plan was to pretend the insemination of a chimpanzee was merely a medical examination, letting them find out months afterwards when they gave birth to an exceptionally hairy and suspiciously good at climbing baby. Yeah. Now, thankfully, the French governor said no to the idea, but Ilya traveled further with 20 apes and was able to convince people to go along with it. 5 women or more volunteered for his experiment. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, no ape survived long enough at the ape nursery, and though he had women, Ilya found himself out of space. Now, before he could ship in more, the Soviet Academy of Sciences heard about his plans to inseminate women in Africa without consent, and all support for the project was taken away. Number 8. Shiro Ishii. Shiro Ishii was a Japanese war criminal, microbiologist, and army medical officer. He was the director of Unit 731, a biological warfare unit of the Imperial Japanese Army. He led the development and application of biological weapons during the Second Sino-Japanese War from 1937 to 1945, including the bubonic plague attacks of Chinese cities, and planned the Operation Cherry Blossoms at Night biological attack against the United States. Ishii and his colleagues also engaged in human experimentation, resulting in the deaths of over 10,000 subjects. Experiments led under his command included vivisection of living people, prisoners had limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their body, some prisoners had parts of their bodies frozen and thawed to study the resulting untreated gangrene, and humans were also used as living test cases for grenades and flamethrowers, and they were injected with strains of diseases disguised as vaccinations to study their effects. Now, for some reason, Ishii was later granted immunity in the International Military Tribunal for the Far East by the United States government in exchange for information and research for the U.S. Biological Warfare Program. Now, Ishii's immunity deal was concluded in 1948, and he was never prosecuted for any war crimes or crimes against humanity, and his exact whereabouts or occupation were unknown. Number 7. Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was a Chinese politician, communist philosopher, military strategist, and revolutionary who was the founder of the People's Republic of China, PRC, which he led as the chairman of the Chinese Communist Party from the establishment of the PRC in 1949 until his death in 1976. Mao sought to protect China from foreign influence and grow China's agricultural and industrial power through a program called the Giant Leap Forward. Now, unfortunately, this initiative was a huge failure that caused widespread widespread famine and economic collapse. Then, Mao's government tried to cover up the failure. Anyone who spoke out against the program was labeled as a right opportunist and would be arrested or have their life ended. In the end, over 45 million people died under his leadership. Now hey, there's nothing wrong with owning up to your mistakes, and I think that's something Mao should have done instead of trying to just gaslight everyone. Number 6. Elizabeth Báthory. Elizabeth Báthory was a Hungarian noblewoman and alleged serial slayer from the family who owned land in the Kingdom of Hungary, now Slovakia. Elizabeth and 4 of her servants were accused of tormenting and ending the lives of hundreds of girls and women between 1590 and 1610. Her servants were put on trial and convicted, whereas Elizabeth was imprisoned within the castle of Szeged. Michael Farron, a writer, said in 1999 that the accusations against Elizabeth were supported by testimony from more than 300 individuals, some of whom described physical evidence and the presence of mutilated, dead, dying, and imprisoned girls found at the time of her arrest. Now, stories about Elizabeth, though, then quickly became part of national folklore. Legends describing her vampiric tendencies, such as the tale that she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth, were generally recorded years after her death. Number 5. Francisco Macias Nguema. Francisco Macias Nguema is viewed as one of the most brutal dictators in history. Under his rule, Equatorial Guinea was nicknamed Dachu of Africa. According to historians, Francisco may have been a psychopath as he suffered from mental illness and suffered psychological trauma as a child. Now, some of his evil reign is that on Christmas Eve 1969, Francisco had 186 suspected dissidents executed in the National Football Stadium in Malabo as amplifiers were playing Mary Hopkins' song "Those Were the Days." 150 of the dissidents were shot or hanged, and the others were forced to dig ditches in which they were buried up to their necks and eaten alive by red ants over the next few days. As time went on, Francisco became incredibly paranoid, which included mandating the death of those who wore glasses, banning the use of the word intellectual, and destroying boats to stop his people from fleeing from his rule, and fishing was banned. He was known to order entire villages to die just to eliminate one suspected dissident. His prisons, most importantly Black Beach, were notorious for human rights abuse, as prisoners were humiliated, starved, tormented, and had their lives ended without due process. Number 4. Leopold II of Belgium. Leopold II of Belgium was the second king of the Belgians from 1865 to 1909 and the founder and sole owner of the Congo Free State from 1885 to 1908. Disguised his work and made it seem humanitarian, whereas he had sinister motives and was using forced labor to move Congolese resources. Leopold II took ownership of Congo and treated it like his personal property, as he referred to himself as the proprietor, and in an attempt to govern the people and their land, all sorts of inhuman and unthinkable methods were used. Now, sadly, Congo was looted and exploited for its natural resources, ivory, and rubber. Leopold II was a brutal slave master, and by the time he was done with Congo, the country had lost a lot of its people. Now, otherwise known as the Butcher of the Congo, Leopold II constantly enslaved and exploited the people, and the people were forced to work without pay, and he would amputate the hands of men, women, and the young when the quota of rubber was not met. By the end of his rule, about half of the population was dead. Number 3. Rafael Trujillo Molina. Rafael Trujillo Molina was a Dominican dictator who ruled the Dominican Republic from August 1930 until his assassination in May 1961. He served as president from 1930 to 1938 and again from 1942 to 1952, ruling for the rest of the time as an unelected military strongman under figurehead presidents. Now, his rule of 31 years is considered one of the bloodiest and most corrupt regimes in the Western Hemisphere and centered around a personality cult of the ruling family. Rafael's security forces were responsible for as many as 50,000 deaths. His domestic policy was built on terror, fear, and total compliance with his will. People called him El Jefe, the chief or the boss, and were utterly obedient towards him and his regime. Resistance was dealt with harshly, and any rebel usually ended up disappearing from the face of the earth. He also hated Haitians, and he ended the lives of every immigrant who was brave enough to speak negatively about the regime and Dominican Republic outside of the country. Almost nobody was safe in their asylum, and no Dominican citizen could leave the country without Rafael's permission. He simply knew everything about everyone and was like a big brother figure. Number 2. Caligula, the third Roman emperor. Ruling the Roman Empire from 37 to 41 AD, Caligula was known to be sadistic, wild, and extravagant. In the first 3 months of his reign, he had 160,000 animals sacrificed. Later, he caught a brain fever and he was known to be mentally ill, believing he was a god. He felt prisoners should know a very painful death and began to end people's lives by causing them as much pain as possible. Many prisoners were fed to the caged wild panthers, lions, and bears, and if he disliked a gladiator, he would beat them over days until they died. Now, he was known to be so cruel that people would end their own lives rather than face him and his slow, lingering deaths. He also forced husbands to give him their wives, and he himself committed unethical practices with his sisters. And coming at number 1 is Idi Amin. Idi Amin was a Ugandan military officer and politician who served as the 3rd president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979. Now, he ruled as a military dictator and is considered one of the most brutal despots in modern world history. In addition to having his political rivals and government officials taken out, he also turned on ordinary civilians as farmers, students, and even religious figures. Amin would order public executions by firing squad for anyone he felt was plotting against his regime, and even had them televised. He'd have all of his victims' bodies tossed into the Nile, literally creating a bloodbath, and bodies were constantly seen floating down the Nile from Uganda, and at times a dam on Lake Victoria would be so clogged by bodies that it would cause power outages. Now, Amin was also rumored to have kept some of his victims' heads in his refrigerator and eat human body parts. His former health minister, Henry Kebi, said, "On several occasions he told me quite proudly that he had eaten the organs or flesh of his human victims. He was quoted as saying, 'It's not for me, I tried human flesh and it's too salty for my taste.'" Coming in at number 10 is Nikolai Yezhov. Nikolai Yezhov was a Soviet secret police officer including at the height of the Great Purge. He organized mass arrests, tormented, and executions, but then he fell from Stalin's good graces. He was arrested and subsequently admitting in a confession to a range of anti-Soviet activity, including unfounded arrests during the Purge. He was executed in 1940 along with others who were blamed for the Purge. Now, Nikolai wasn't only ousted, executed, and disgraced along with his family, he was then methodically erased from photographs where he had previously appeared with his commander. Overnight, Nikolai went from one of the highest officers in a powerful New World Order to a shadow in a poorly lit photo and a name no one dared to utter. Now, Nikolai wasn't the only person to receive this Photoshop treatment, as it was common in the communist government to deny failures and make inconvenient truths, even people, disappear. Now, the practice has continued in current communist-led governments where rebellious leaders are removed by force and deleted from official documents. Coming in at number 9 is Delphine LaLaurie. Delphine LaLaurie was a sadistic serial slayer socialite who lived in New Orleans. On April 10, 1834, a fire broke out in her mansion's kitchen, and firefighters found a 70-year-old black woman chained to the stove. Now, she appeared to have started the fire in order to attract outside attention while Delphine was trying to save her furniture. Now, the authorities were led by other slaves to the attic, and they were shocked. Disfigured and maimed slaves were chained to the walls or floors. Several had been subjects to medical experiments, most likely performed by her husband, who was a doctor. One man appeared to be part of some bizarre change. A woman was trapped in a small cage with her limbs broken and reset to look like a crab, and another woman with arms and legs removed and patches of her flesh sliced off in a circular motion to resemble a caterpillar. There were claims that an elderly man had his face so beaten it was indistinguishable, and one woman had her back wounded to the point where her bones were visible. Some had their mouths sewn shut and starved to death, others had their hands sewn to different body parts, and most were found dead, and the remaining that were alive were begging to die to be released from the unbearable pain. Now, LaLaurie and her husband fled by boat before she could be brought to justice, leaving the butler, who also participated, to face the wrath of a mob that had gathered outside. Number 8. Zhang Qing. Zhang Qing was a Chinese communist revolutionary, actress, and major political figure during the Cultural Revolution. She was the fourth wife of Mao Zedong, the chairman of the Communist Party and paramount leader of China. Now, Zhang was best known for playing a major role in the Cultural Revolution and forming the radical political alliance known as the Gang of Four. Through clever maneuvering, she managed to reach the highest position of power within the Communist Party, just short of being president. It is believed that she was the main driving force force behind China's Cultural Revolution, of which she was the deputy director. Now, during the Cultural Revolution, much economic activity was halted, and countless ancient buildings, artifacts, antiques, books, and paintings were destroyed by Red Guards. Millions of people in China reportedly had their human rights annulled during this time, and millions more were also forcibly displaced. Estimates of the death toll of civilians and Red Guards from various Western and Eastern sources are about 500,000 in the true years of chaos of 1966 to 1969, but some estimate as high as 3 million deaths, with 36 million being prosecuted. Number 7. Jang Song-taek. Jang Song-taek was the uncle of the current dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-un. He was more focused on following in the ways of his brother, Kim Jong-il, something that the new dictator didn't agree with. Now, at the beginning of his rule, Kim Jong-un was still considered quite young for his political position, and some of his choices were questionable at best. Seeing that his uncle didn't agree with him, he had him tried by a special military tribunal and executed by a firing squad. Now, after his execution, Kim ordered all media outlets within North Korea to remove any sort of record of him, and that included any sort of pictures or information from history books. Number 6. Peter Burnett. Peter Burnett was an American politician who served as the first elected governor of California from December 20th, 1849 to January 9th, 1851. Now, in 1848, he moved to California during the height of the California Gold Rush. He was appointed to serve on the Supreme Court of California, and even though he had enslaved 2 people, to make California a slave state, instead pushing for a total exclusion of African Americans in California. Governor Peter signed into the law the so-called Act for the Government and Protection of Indians, which enabled the enslavement of native Californians and contributed to their genocide. He declared in an 1851 speech that a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate the results, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power and wisdom of man to avert. Now, efforts by federal negotiators to preserve some native land rights were fought by the administration of Peter, who favored the elimination of California's indigenous peoples. Now, he also passed the Foreign Miners Act, which taxed only Chinese and Mexicans, deliberately designed to drive them out of the gold fields. Now, a wave of violence against them took place before and after. Number 5. H.H. Holmes. H.H. Holmes was a con artist who liked to take the lives of people. Until his execution in 1896, he chose a career of crime, including insurance fraud, 3 to 4 illegal marriages, horse theft, and ending the lives of many. He claimed to have ended the lives of 27 people before he was arrested, tried, and executed. He constructed a hotel of horrors, later known as the Murder Castle, to target guests visiting the Windy City during the 1893 World Fair. Now, the building was equipped with soundproof rooms and had gas lines that could be used to asphyxiate guests. It also had trap doors and a secret series of tunnels that Holmes could use to spirit away their bodies, which he was believed to have dissected and sold. Now, in the basement were a dissecting table, stretching rack, and industrial oven. On May 7th, 1896, Holmes was executed, and in 2017, amid allegations that Holmes had in fact escaped execution, his body was exhumed for testing. Due to his coffin being contained in cement, his body was found not to have decomposed normally. His clothes were almost perfectly preserved, and his mustache was found to be intact. Now, his body was positively identified by his teeth as being that of Holmes, and he was then reburied. Number 4. Ante Pavelic. Ante Pavelic was a Croatian politician who founded and headed the fascist ultranationalist organization known as the Ustashi in 1929 and served as a dictator of the independent state of Croatia, also known as the NDH. Ante and the Ustashi prosecuted many racial minorities and political opponents in the NDH during the war, including Serbians, Jewish and Roma people, and anti-fascists, becoming one of the key figures side of Serbians. At the behest of the Germans, senior Ustaše Slavo Kosmic declared the NDH's establishment on April 10, 1941 in the name of Ante. Ante then returned from Italy and took control of the puppet government. He created a political system similar to that of fascist Italy and Germany. After taking control, Ante imposed largely anti-Serbian and anti-Semitic policies that resulted in the deaths of over 100,000 Serbians and Jewish people in concentration and extermination camps in the NDH, which resulted resulted in the torment and deaths of several 100,000 Serbians, along with tens of thousands of Roma and Jewish people. Now, following the surrender of Germany in May 1945, he fled, and ironically, on April 10, 1957, a Serbian hotel owner attempted to end his life by shooting him. Now, initially surviving, the resulting injuries would lead to his death on December 28, 1959. Number 3. General Yahya Khan. General Yahya Khan was a Pakistani military officer who served as the third president of Pakistan from 1969 to 1971. Now, he also served as the commander-in-chief of the Pakistan Army from 1966 to 1971. Now, along with Tika Khan, he is considered the chief architect of the 1971 Bangladesh genocide. Yahya Khan's presidency oversaw marital law by suspending the constitution in 1969. Holding the country's first general election in 1970, he delayed the power of transition, and in March 1971, Khan ordered Operation Searchlight in an effort to suppress Bengali nationalism. This led to the Bangladesh Liberation War in March 1971. Now, Khan was central to the perpetration of Bangladesh genocide, in which around 300,000 to 3 million Bengalis died, and between 200,000 to 400,000 women were taken advantage of. In December 1971, Pakistan carried out preemptive strikes against the Bengali allied Indian Army, culminating the start of the Third Indian-Pakistan War. Now, the wars resulted in the surrender of Pakistan, and East Pakistan seceded as Bangladesh. After Pakistan's surrender, Khan resigned from the military command and transferred the presidency. Khan's short regime is regarded as the leading cause of the breakup of Pakistan. He is viewed negatively in both Bangladesh, being considered the chief architect of genocide, and in Pakistan. Number 2. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a Cambodian revolutionary, dictator, and politician who ruled Cambodia as the Prime Minister of Democrat Kampuchea between 1976 and 1979. He was a leading member of Cambodia's communist movement, the Khmer Rouge, from 1963 to 1997, and served as General Secretary of the Communist Party of Kampuchea from 1963 to 1981. Now, his administration converted Cambodia into a one-party communist state and perpetrated the Cambodian genocide. Pot planned to turn Cambodia into a simple, agrarian, and socialist society. He forced the urban population, such as teachers, doctors, and other professionals, into the countryside, onto collective farms, and executed anyone who complained or broke rules by a pickaxe. There was more than 150 detention centers for any dissidents. S-21, the most notorious one, had 7 survivors out of 20,000. Others were taken to fields, executed, and buried in mass graves. Now, he also outlawed religion, most reading, money, anything private, and strictly governed sexual relations, vocabulary, and clothing. Out of a country of not even 10 million people, it's estimated up to 3 million people died in just 3 years. Number 1. Queen Ravaloa. Queen Ravaloa was known as the Mad Queen of Madagascar, and I feel like that explains a lot. She finally ascended to the throne on August 4th, 1829, where she immediately took out all her rivals. She had expelled the European merchants, teachers, diplomats, and trade deals with Britain and France were immediately cancelled. After one successful battle against an invasion, she slit the heads of Europeans, stuck them on pikes, and lined them in the beaches. Now, she also banned the teachings of Christianity, and she had many evil techniques to punish people, as her descendants and criminals would be dumped slowly in boiling water or oil, or tied down with ropes and burned alive. She would place others into coffins, and some were buried into holes with dirt showered upon them. She sold her subjects into slavery to boost her country's economy, which involved brutal labor conditions, staying far away from homes, and malnutrition-related deaths. Now, these people were either considered traitors, victims of war, non-taxpayers, or Christians who secretly practiced their religion. Her reign brought down the nation's population from 5 million to 2.5 million at the end of her rule.
And we're starting things off with Jeronique Cunningham and Cleveland Jackson. On January 3rd of 2002, Jeronique Cunningham and his half-brother Cleveland Jackson committed a violent crime in Lima, Ohio. They took the lives of 3-year-old Jala Grant and 17-year-old Lanisha Williams. The victims, along with 6 others, were present at the house of a man targeted by Cunningham and Jackson for a robbery involving drugs and money. Following the robbery, Cunningham and Jackson opened fire on everyone inside the house. Tragically, Jala died while her father held her in his arms. Cunningham and Jackson also attempted to take the lives of the survivors, each of whom sustained gunshot injuries during the incident. Both Cunningham and Jackson were convicted, with Jackson receiving a death sentence. Cunningham is currently serving a life sentence. Next on the list is George Wagner IV. In April of 2016 in Pike County, Ohio, a gruesome incident took place, now known as the Pike County Massacre. 8 members of the Rodin family were tragically taken from life in 4 separate homes. The victims included 7 adults and a 16-year-old, all shot to death. In November of 2018, authorities arrested George Wagner III, his wife Angela Wagner, and their 2 sons, George Wagner IV and Edward Wagner Jr., in connection with the crimes. The family was accused of meticulously planning and executing these attacks. Their motive was believed to be centered around child custody, financial disputes, and an illegal marijuana growing operation. Next up, we have Michael Madison. So Michael Madison, born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1977, was convicted in 2016 for the deaths of 3 young women in East Cleveland, Ohio. Between 2012 and 2013, he took the lives of his victims, whose remains were discovered in various locations near his residence. Madison's arrest in 2013 followed the discovery of the first victim's body wrapped in plastic in a garage. Neighbors had noticed a foul odor coming from his property, and authorities were alerted. Their investigations continued, and this led to the identification of 2 additional victims. Police found the remains of the second victim in a weeded lot, and the third victim's body was found in a nearby abandoned house in the basement. During his trial, Madison actually smirked, causing a father of one of the victims to lunge at him in anger. Luckily, that man was released without charges. Madison was found guilty of multiple charges, including aggravated murder and kidnapping. In 2016, he was sentenced to death for his crimes. Next up on the list is Donald Hofman. Donald Hofman was convicted of taking the lives of 4 men over the Labor Day weekend in 2015. He was sentenced to 4 consecutive life terms. The victims, Freeland Hensley, 67, Gerald Smith, 65, Billy Jack Chapman, 55, and Daryl Lewis, 65, were residents of Bucharest, Ohio. Hofman admitted to his crimes, stating he committed the acts to fund his drug addiction. And during the slayings, Hofman used various methods of violence. He beat Hensley with a frying pan, strangled Smith with an electrical cord, struck Smith in the head with a bottle, strangled Lewis with shoelaces, and attacked Chapman with a pry bar. Hofman stole the victim's debit and credit cards, spending over $2,100 on drugs and cigarettes. Prosecutor revealed that Hofman specifically targeted older men with health issues, whom he knew personally. Number 6, the Downtown Posse. During the Christmas season of 1992, the Downtown Posse, led by Marvelous Keene, embarked on a brutal crime spree in Dayton, Ohio. The first victim was Joseph Wilkerson, a 34-year-old General Motors worker. The gang lured their way into his home, where Wilkinson was shot. The gang then partied in his house for the next 3 days while he lay dead in a bedroom. On the same night, they took the life of 18-year-old Danita Golette, who was using a payphone. She was robbed of her belongings and lost her life despite pleading not to be harmed and cooperating as best as she could with them. The following day, the body of 19-year-old Richard Maddox, a former boyfriend of one of the gang members, was discovered. Jeffrey Wright was also shot but survived his attack, having received multiple wounds. Continuing their violent spree, the gang shot Sarah Abraham, 8-year-old mother working in a family business. Abraham succumbed to her injuries 5 days later. On December 26th, former Dayton Police Sergeant John Huber spotted a stolen car connected to the group. He arrested them, not yet aware of their involvement in everything else that had been going on. After their arrest, Laura Taylor, one of the members of the Downtown Posse, confessed to 2 more victims, the bodies of Wendy Cottrill and Marvin Washington, who were found in a gravel pit. Taylor revealed they took them out because the gang believed they might inform the police about their crimes. Marvelous Keene, the gang's leader, confessed and was sentenced to death, with his sentence being carried out back in 2009. The other 3 members received life prison sentences. Next on the list is Edward Edwards, which is just the dumbest name I've ever heard. Just laziness on his parents' behalf, but that's all this guy really deserved. Born in 1933, Edwards' criminal activities started at a young age with burglaries and frauds. He was arrested multiple times over the years for various offenses, including arson, robbery. In 1961, he was convicted of arson and spent several years in prison. After being released, though, Edwards took the lives of several people, including his own adopted son. He took the lives of two different couples in the 70s, and in 1992, he ended the life of his adoptive son, Donnie Boy Edwards, committing the crime for financial gain in order to collect his $250,000 life insurance policy. Edwards' crimes went undetected for many years, allowing him to continue his criminal activities, but in 2009, he was finally apprehended and charged with crimes he committed decades earlier. He was linked to the crimes through advancements in forensic technology and DNA evidence. Ariel Castro. Castro was born in Puerto Rico, but he moved to Cleveland, Ohio with his mother when he was young, and this is where he would grow up to commit his crimes. Castro was responsible for the abduction and imprisonment of three women: Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina De Jesus. These three women were held captive in Castro's home for about 10 years. That is crazy. One of the victims, Amanda Berry, even gave birth to her daughter during this time. They were subjected to physical and emotional torment, which included being kept in restraints, confined to a few rooms in the house. Amanda Berry managed to escape from Castro's home in May of 2013, though. Castro had left the home for the day, and she managed to catch a glimpse of his neighbors through a screen door. She screamed for help and managed to make contact with them. All three women were luckily rescued, as well as Berry's daughter. Castro was arrested shortly after the escape. In 2013, he was charged with multiple counts. To avoid the possibility of facing the death penalty, he later pleaded guilty to the charges, and in August 2013, Castro was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and, just because why not, he got an additional 1,000 years in prison. So yeah, safe to say he's not getting released anytime soon. Next up, we have TJ Lane. So many have heard of this case. This guy became pretty infamous for his conduct in the courtroom, where he showed absolutely zero remorse or regret for his actions, taunting the victims' families, giving the middle finger to everyone in the courtroom, and pretty astonishing, really. TJ Lane was convicted for a school shooting at Chardon High School in Ohio on February 27th of 2012. He opened fire in the school cafeteria, resulting in the deaths of 3 students and injuries to 3 others, one of which became permanently paralyzed. Lane was arrested the same day and later found guilty of multiple charges. In 2013, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Lane actually did manage to escape from prison in 2014, along with 2 other inmates. They'd used a makeshift ladder to scale a fence during recreational hours. Luckily, though, he was found later that night. He's now serving in a maximum security prison, the Southern Ohio Correctional Facility. Next up, we have Robert Berdella. Now, this guy died in 1992, so a return is highly unlikely, but he's got to be one of the worst criminals in Ohio's history, right up there with Dahmer, possibly even worse. He was born in Ohio in 1949, but his crimes were carried out in Kansas City between 1984 and 87. He was responsible for the deaths of at least 6 men. Berdella lured his victims, often vulnerable young men, to his home with promise of money or shelter, and once in his captivity, he subjected them to prolonged periods of sadistic torment. He would hold them in captivity, sometimes for as long as 6 weeks at a time, before disposing of them. His crime spree came to an end in 1988, though, when one of his victims managed to escape and alert the police. The bodies of his former victims were never found, unfortunately, but police did find journals and Berdella had written chronicling his crimes, as well as photographs and personal belongings of the victims. Berdella was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. He died in prison in 1992 due to a heart attack. Finally, we have Sean Great, eventually being sentenced to death for his crimes, having taken the life of 5 young women. His last victim, whose real name has been kept secret, known to the public simply as Jane Doe, had met Great at the Ashland Salvation Army. Ray and Joan Croc Core Community Center. She viewed their relationship as purely platonic and would consistently reject his advances, but Great managed to lure her to his home using the ruse of offering her some clothes he claimed to have for her. Once inside though, his personality completely flipped and he attacked her. She ended up being held captive for 3 whole days. But there's a light at the end of this tunnel. She managed to find an opportunity to secretly contact the police while Great was asleep. This led to his arrest and the end of her nightmare. And during the legal proceedings that followed, Great was found guilty of his crimes. He's currently sitting on death row. And we're starting out this list with Grigory Rasputin. Born in 1869 in a small Siberian village, he grew up as a peasant. He was also a mystic and grew up to become quite close with the Russian royal family after seemingly healed Alexei Nikolaevich, the son of Nicholas II and heir to the Russian throne. Alexei was a hemophiliac, meaning his blood didn't clot properly, and Rasputin, after being called to the palace of Nicholas and Alexandra, seemed to ease his symptoms. This was miraculous, and the royal family put their full trust in this mysterious holy man who would go on to have sleeping with any woman he could within the palace, but he was also known to force himself on women. But because Nicholas and Alexandra were so enamored with his supposed power, any concern or report about him was completely written off. It seemed that everyone on the outside wanted the guy gone though, seeing how he was pulling Nicholas and Alexandra's strings, controlling them like puppets, and there were a number of attempts to take Rasputin's life, but this guy was hard to take down. He was stabbed and recovered, poisoned with cyanide, which had no effect. He was shot and was seemingly dead before springing up like Michael Myers at the end of Halloween. He was then shot again before being wrapped up in a blanket and thrown in a river where he finally drowned. Number 9, Gilles de Rais. Born in 1404, Gilles de Rais was a French nobleman and a respected military leader, but he had a secret life. He was responsible for viciously taking the lives of countless young ones and was said to be a practitioner of black magic and conducted occult rituals, leading many to believe that he possessed otherworldly abilities. This guy was an absolute monster. If you want to talk about true evil, this is it right here. His servants, mostly young men, very young men, and other young ones around his castles, started going missing, and rumors started to spread that Gilles de Rais was disposing of them, something that turned out to be true when witnesses began seeing servants disposing of bodies. Many were afraid to speak out against him, though, due to the immense gap in class that was present at the time. He was finally arrested in 1440, though, and under the threat of excruciating punishment, he admitted to his crimes, actually revealing that he would take the lives of his victims in these dark, occult-like rituals. Next on the list, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, born August 7th, 1560, was a Hungarian noblewoman notorious for being one of the most prolific female serial killers in history. She's often remembered as the Blood Countess because of her horrifying crimes. Bathory was accused of tormenting and taking the lives of numerous young females. Her methods included severe beatings, burning, and disfigurement. And what she's most famous for, though, was her belief that bathing in her victim's blood would preserve her youth. It's said that she may have taken the lives of hundreds in her quest for eternal beauty. Her actions eventually caught the attention of authorities. In 1610, she was arrested and her accomplices were put on trial, and the accounts from witnesses and survivors painted a very chilling picture of her cruelty. She was never officially tried in court, but was confined to a windowless room in her castle until her death in 1614. Number 7, Aleister Crowley. Crowley, born in 1875, was an English occultist and ceremonial magician, founded the religion of Thelema. He was a prominent and very controversial guy, especially at the time, known as the Great Beast 666. He was an occultist, writer, and ceremonial magician, a man of many mysteries and oddities. Crowley was known for more than just his eccentric lifestyle, though. One of the big questions surrounding him is whether he actually had any mystical powers or was just really good at talking the talk. Crowley wasn't shy about bragging that he could communicate with supernatural beings. He claimed to have a direct line to a being named Aiwass, who supposedly dictated to him the Book of the Law, basically the Bible of Thelema. Then there's the curious case of his rituals. Crowley was all about strange ceremonies, often involving weird symbols and chants, and even some bizarre sexual practices. As to whether he was evil, I mean, some would definitely say he was, but yeah, certainly not like most of the others on this list. Like this next guy, for example. And at number 6, Thug Behram. Thug Behram, born in 1765, became infamous as the ruthless leader of the Thuggee cult in India during the 18th and 19th centuries. The Thuggee were a secret criminal society that specialized in robbery and murder, targeting unsuspecting travelers. What made the Thuggee particularly sinister was their method of operation. They would often befriend and gain the trust of their victims on the road, only to then strangle them with a rummel, a cloth, and this kind of ritualistic fashion, allowing them to carry out their crimes discreetly. Behram was one of the most notorious Thuggee leaders, believed to have taken the lives of hundreds. He actually admitted to witnessing 931 people die right in front of him, and that's not even counting the ones he had a direct hand in. Under his leadership, the thugs terrorized India for years with a well-organized network that spanned the country. He was eventually captured and put to death in 1840. Next, we have H.H. Holmes. Holmes was born in 1861 in Gilmanton, New Hampshire. Although he was highly intelligent from a young age, he displayed all your classic disturbing signs early on. He would capture and torture animals, cutting into them and performing strange experiments. Holmes, whose real name was Herman Webster Mudgett, not quite as intimidating sounding, committed crimes that were as horrifying as they were calculated. He constructed this nightmarish castle in Chicago, specifically equipped with secret passageways and soundproof rooms and gas chambers, which were all made to assist with his gruesome crimes. He would lure numerous victims, mostly young women, surprise, surprise, into his property, and once inside, they came face to face with unimaginable horrors, including excruciating torment, asphyxiation, and dissection. The exact number of his victims isn't 100% known, but it could be anywhere from just 9 to over 200. I'm guessing it's somewhere in between. In 1896, he was finally convicted for his crimes and sentenced to death. Number 4, Gilles Garner. Here we have a real-life werewolf case, at least the closest thing possible. Gilles Garner, aka the Hermit of Saint Benoît and the Werewolf of Dole, was a reclusive man born at some point in the mid-1500s in France. He lived in an isolated home just outside the town of Dole. His new wife moved out to the home with him, and it was at this point that something changed in Garnier. He had always hunted food for himself, but now having to provide for another person, it was difficult, and this started driving a wedge between him and his wife, and he started getting desperate. It was at this point that several young ones in the area started being found mauled to death with parts of their bodies having been eaten. Meaning this had to have been the work of some large animal, right? But it wasn't. It was Garnier. Garnier's crimes came to light when a group of traveling workers had spotted him eating the body of one of his victims in the dead of night. At first, they thought they were looking at a wolf. According to Garnier, he had been hunting one night when a ghostly figure came to him, telling him it would imbue him with the power to transform into a wolf, making it easier for him to hunt. Since that night, he had stalked and hunted a number of young people, most of which died as a result of his savage attacks. He was burnt at the stake in 1574, accused of lycanthropy and witchcraft. I don't know what it was with guys named Gilles in France back then, but they didn't like young folks, apparently. Number 3, Vlad the Impaler, the original vampire himself. If there's anyone in history that just feels like they stepped out of some portal from another dark dimension, it's this guy. Vlad was born in 1431. He was a tyrant renowned for his brutal methods of punishing enemies, often impaling them on long spikes. His reputation for cruelty gave rise to the legend that is Dracula, inspiring Bram Stoker's famous vampire novel. Alongside these gruesome acts, there are legends suggesting Vlad may have possessed otherworldly powers. Tales kind of hint at his ability to control the weather, summon dark forces, or even transform into a vampire-like creature. The line between fact and fiction often blurs with this guy. Some believe that his cruelty was more than human, that maybe he had something supernatural lurking inside him, some sort of dark entity from beyond. He just inspired this intense fear and awe in his time, and his brutality definitely unquestionable, but the idea of him being an actual vampire, most likely just legend, but fun to imagine. And at number 2, we have Jack the Ripper, a name everyone has heard before. One of the first cases of the type of modern day serial killer we hear about all the time now, only this man was never identified. Jack the Ripper terrorized the Whitechapel district of London in 1888 and remains one of the most infamous figures in criminal history. Victims were taken out in the most gruesome ways possible. They looked like they had been mauled to death by a 500-pound brown bear. Jack primarily targeted female workers of the night, brutally mutilating their bodies. The sheer level of ferocity of these attacks and the fact that he was never caught really has fueled the theories and speculations over the years about him. He taunted the police with letters that were apparently from him, signed as Jack the Ripper. There have been intensive investigations and a number of suspects that have kind of come up over the years that could have been him, but his true identity has never been definitively proven. Finally, we have Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler was a high-ranking German official during World War II. He had a deep and disturbing fascination with the occult. He believed he could summon dark forces to help him shape a new world order and tried to incorporate his beliefs into the ideology of the regime. He established a research institute to explore ancient and supernatural phenomena. Under his direction, he conducted these expeditions to search for evidence of Aryan origins, looking into topics like ancient artifacts, astrology, folklore, and this interest extended to the dark and the occult, as Himmler believed that tapping into these mystical forces would help the German forces gain more power and control. He promoted pseudo-scientific theories, obviously related to racial purity and mysticism, and saw the SS almost as this more modern-day knightly kind of order. Such a bizarre side of the Second World War. It feels like something out of Hellboy, but this really was a thing. The German forces were really dabbling in this type of occult stuff at the time.
Coming in at number 10 is Kim Jong-un. Little is known about North Korea due to their dictator Kim Jong-un's rule, but what we do know is absolutely terrifying. Kim is very strict with his people as they can't access the internet, and if they do, it can only be government-approved sites. Same goes with film. The citizens are also treated horribly there. There's hardly any food and everyone is weak and hungry, and it's even been said that the streets are lined with dead bodies. They also have very strict laws that result in people being executed or sent to prison camps, which are one of the worst forms of torment. A former guard likened the prisoners to walking skeletons, dwarfs, and cripples in rags, and he estimated that about 30% of the prisoners had deformities such as torn off ears, smashed eyes, crooked noses, and faces covered with cuts and scars resulting from beatings and other mistreatment, and that those people were still forced to work. They had to do hard physical labor in agriculture, mining, and inside factories from 5 a.m. to 8 p.m., followed by ideological re-education and self-criticism sessions. Now, prisoners there are forced to sleep in a room with 80 to 90 people in 30 square meter flea-infested rooms, and are only occasionally allowed to use the toilet, which there is one for about every 300 people, and may only take a shower after several months. No one should have to live like that, it's horrible, and this is just the stuff we do know. Kim is so secretive, I fear we don't know the true horrors of what goes on in North Korea. Korea. Number 9. Pedro Lopez. Known as the Monster of the Andes, Pedro Lopez is currently the second most prolific serial slayer in recorded history. Between 1969 and 1980, he claimed the lives of at least 110 girls throughout northern South America. However, he personally claims to have ended the lives of over 300 at a rate of 3 victims per week. He was finally arrested in 1980 and remained imprisoned until 1994. Then soon after his confession, he directed the authorities to the bodies of 53 victims, and his confession soon led to the confirmation of a total of 110 bodies in Ecuador. Later in 1980, Pedro was convicted of homicide and sentenced to 16 years in prison, the maximum prison sentence available in Ecuador at the time. However, Pedro was quickly re-arrested and sent to a mental institution in his native Colombia. He remained there for 4 years and was released in 1998 as he was declared sane and released on a $70 bail on the condition that he would periodically report to the authorities, but he almost immediately ran away. The last reported sighting of Pedro was in September 1999 when he visited the National Civil Registry to renew his citizenship card. In 2002, Colombian National Police and Interpol issued warrants for his arrest over a death bearing similarities to his MO. The Interpol warrant was deactivated in 2005, but he still remains a fugitive. Neither his location nor his status are known of today. Number 8. Vlad the Impaler. Born in 1431, Vlad Tepes the Impaler earned his nickname from his favorite method of execution for enemies of the state and witches. He was the ruler of Wallachia, and according to legend, he would impale his victims on a sharp stake or nail them headfirst onto a large wooden pole and then watch as they died slowly from blood loss. His other favorite methods were boiling them alive in oil or water or both, burning them alive with sulfur, and roasting them over an open fire. He also enjoyed hanging criminals upside down from poles and then cutting off their heads with a saber while they were still alive, just so they could see what was happening before they died. Yeah, I wouldn't want to get on his bad side. Number 7. Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was the founder and first Khagan of the Mongol Empire, which later became the largest adjoining land empire in history. Having spent the majority of his life uniting Mongol tribes, he launched a series of military campaigns which conquered large parts of China and Central Asia. In the 13th century, he ended the lives of so many peasants that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere were significantly reduced as a result. During his 21-year reign, his destructive armies were responsible for the deaths up to 40 million people. Now, with so many people gone and nobody left to farm the lands owned by peasants, nature went back to its true form and grew back into carbon-absorbing forests. Now, it's estimated that 700 million tons of carbon were wiped from the atmosphere, which, to put in perspective, is around the same amount of carbon dioxide generated in a year through global gasoline consumption. While that was good for the environment, it wasn't good for the people who lost their lives. He then died in August of 1227, but his death was kept a closely guarded secret. According to legend, Genghis Khan's last words were to a few faithful followers, which were, "I have conquered for you a large empire, but my life was too short to take the whole world. That I leave you." Now that is also absolutely terrifying to hear. Number 6. Ivan the Terrible. I mean, with a name like that, you gotta know he's a bad guy. Renowned for his temper and paranoia, Russian ruler Ivan IV Vasilievich inspired incredible fear. As a teenager, he liked mistreating animals, throwing cats and dogs from the Kremlin ramparts. He served as the first Tsar of Russia, reigning from 1533 to 1584. He established a personal guard who helped him terrorize and oppress his subjects through torment and execution. After defections and the death of his wife in the 1560s, he became even more violent, ordering the massacre of Novgorod in 1570 with casualties in the thousands. He also beat his own pregnant daughter-in-law, after which she miscarried. When his son asked him about this, he was filled with rage at this apparent uproar of disloyalty from his son and struck him with a staff he often carried to punish servants. The strike cracked his son's skull, and the blow ultimately ended his life, leaving Ivan's other son as the new heir. Number 5. Shiro Ishii. Unit 731 was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that undertook lethal human experimentation during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. It was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes carried out by Japanese personnel. Some of the numerous atrocities committed by the commander Shiro Ishii and others under his command in Unit 731 include vivisection of living people, including pregnant women who were impregnated by the doctors. Prisoners had limbs amputated and reattached to other parts of their their body. Some prisoners had part of their bodies frozen and thawed to study the resulting untreated gangrene. Humans were also used as living test cases for grenades and flamethrowers, and prisoners were injected with strains of diseases disguised as vaccinations to study their effects. Now, having been granted immunity by the American occupation authorities at the end of the war, Ishii never spent any time in jail for his crimes and died at the age of 67 of throat cancer. The death toll of these brutal experiments is unknown, but many as 200,000 people may have died, estimates historian Sheldon H. Harris, according to a 1995 New York Times report. Number 4. Robert Thompson and John Venables. On February 12, 1993, elementary school boys Robert Thompson and John Venables lured James Patrick Bulger away from the New Strand Shopping Center and Bootle after his mother had taken her eyes off him momentarily. The two boys had approached James, took him by the hand, and led him out of the shopping center. They then took James to the Leeds and Liverpool Canal, around a quarter mile from the shopping center, where they dropped him on his head and he suffered injuries to his face. One of the boys threw blue paint that they had shoplifted earlier into James's left eye. They kicked him, stomped on him, and threw bricks and stones at him. They placed batteries in James's mouth, and finally the boys dropped a 22-pound railway fish plate on him. His mutilated body was found on the railway line 2 days after his abduction. He sustained 10 skull fractures as a result of the bar striking his head, and pathologist Alan Williams stated that he suffered so many injuries, 42 in total, that none could be identified as the fatal blow. Now, Robert and John were charged on February 20th, 1993 with abduction and homicide, and they were found guilty on November 24th, making them the youngest convicted slayers in modern British history. They were sentenced to an indefinite detention center at Her Majesty's pleasure and remained in custody until a parole board decision in June 2001 recommended their release on a lifelong license at 18. Number 3. Jim Jones. In the 1950s, Indiana native Jim Jones founded a church called the People's Temple that he claimed to promote socialism and equality with religious elements of Christianity. Initially, he was a little more than a charismatic hustler, but as the years progressed, he demanded more and more of his followers. In the early 1970s, Jones moved his group to California and set them in a commune-like settlement in Redwood Valley. Jones eventually came to believe that a nuclear war was imminent and moved his followers again to the South American country of Guyana, which he thought would be outside the potential danger zone. The group lived there for several years as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but after former members started speaking out against the church, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan decided to travel to Jonestown to investigate claims of mistreatment. Temple security guards opened fire on Leo's group, and back at the settlement, Jones ordered his followers to drink a cyanide-laced beverage, and this is where the phrase "drinking the Kool-Aid" originates. A total of 918 people died in the incident, and until 2001, it was the largest loss of American civilian life in history. Number 2. Nero. Nero was a deranged Roman emperor and the final emperor of the Julio-Claudian dynasty, reigning from AD 54 until his death in AD 68. It's hard to be worse than having your own mother executed and poisoning your stepbrother, right? Well, what about burning prisoners in your garden at night as a source of light? Yeah, well, that's him. Now, Nero married Poppaea Sabina, but she mysteriously perished before having their second child. Now, historians of the time claim that Nero actually kicked Poppaea to death, and after her death, Nero fell in love with a man named Sporus, whose most striking feature was the resemblance to Nero's late wife. Nero then had the boy castrated and brought back to his palace, where he took calling him Lady and Queen. Now, ultimately, Nero's lifestyle caught up to him, and in 68 AD, after a turbulent 13-year reign, the Roman Senate ran out of patience and declared Nero a public enemy. Nero then fled, and on June 9th, 68 AD, at the age of 30, he ended his own life. And coming in at number 1 is Ed Gein. Ed Gein was a serial slayer and grave robber. He created costumes, furniture, and other keepsakes from the bodies of his victims. While he was only officially convicted of taking the lives of 2 people, Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, a police raid on his house turned up masks literally made from humans' faces, a belt of nipples, and a corset created from a skin torso. Now, to be clear, he never wore these costumes when ending people's lives. Instead, he donned them in the privacy of his own home. Now, some masks appeared mummified, almost dried out, while others were more carefully preserved. A few had lipstick applied and looked more lifelike, and 4 had been stuffed with paper and hung on the wall of his bedroom, almost like hunting trophies. Ed was initially found unfit to stand trial and confined to a mental health facility, but by 1968 he was judged competent to stand trial. He was found guilty of the deaths, but he was found legally insane and was remanded to a psychiatric institution. Coming in at number 10 is meditation. On April 13th, 2022, 22, Stephanie Hosmeyer replied to the question online that read, "Have you accidentally summoned a demon?" She replied by saying, "Yes, I did. Wow, what a mistake. I think I was just meditating with these stones a friend gave me for watching her dogs for her. They were polished stones in a medicine bag. So I was holding 4 in each hand and kinda just letting my mind wander when I got slammed in the back and saw white stars in my head. I heard demonic laughter and a bunch of banging upstairs. I blew out my candle and fled the house. When I went back, the house seemed okay, but that night I saw shadow crawlers all over the walls and poltergeist activities began. I heard children laughing when my kids were at school. Things came up missing to be found where I already looked. I saw a figure in the hallway so many times I put my hand out to not run into him. And my luck was so bad, it still is. We fled that house in the night and burned it down." Number 9. School summoning. Now, according to legend, one cold night in the early 1600s, a group of schoolboys were naively dabbling in arcane magic when, by some terrible ritual using mere bread and sticks, they summoned Satan himself from the flames of the fireplace. Now, the terrified boys sought desperately to send the Prince of Darkness back to where he had come from, but to no avail. They then tried to hide their mistake, however, realizing this might not go away as easily as their other mistakes, they needed help. The boys hurried for the schoolmaster, old Mr. Hodgson, who already well knew something was awry after his ensorcelled trencher had begun to spin by some necromantic spell. The schoolmaster hurried at once to confront the evil intruder, whom he found smugly awaiting him. Tauntingly, Satan called out to the schoolmaster, "Ye know the bargain, thou hast 3 chances to defeat me in battle of wits, or else thy soul is mine for eternity." Now, the wise schoolmaster challenged his adversary to first count all the blades of grass on the castle croft. In a flash of smoke, the devil hurried away to the banks of the Irwell near Bury Castle and completed the task in less than an hour. The schoolmaster then challenged him to count all the grains of sand on the school brow, but in this too the devil succeeded. For his final task, the undaunted and steady schoolmaster challenged Satan to count all the letters in the parish church's large Bible. After jeering that too would prove easy, Satan made his way to the nearby church, and upon finding the leather-bound book on the pulpit, he heaved open the cover. At once, however, the words on the ancient vellum began to dance and blur before his eyes, and he knew that he had been beaten. Enraged, Satan departed back into the fireplace, and with a deafening crack, a large fissure appeared in the stone. To this day, the devil's stone remains visible and now sits under a clock. Number 8. 2 demons. A Reddit user said they contacted Lilith and Lucifer. When asked what happened, they said, "You can feel their presence. When I summoned Lilith, she lightly had her energy around my neck, and I felt heavy weight on my body. She whispered to me, and I spoke to her, asked my parents' names, and she knew them. Treat Lilith like a mother and don't take her lightly." Lucifer I summoned, and near the end of the summoning, I got past the fear stage where he kept putting the image of a skinwalker in my head, and then I made a deal with him in a white room, and his face was concealed to join the 1006 and to have my demands done after I wrote a letter to him. Number 7. Lasting effects. This Reddit user made a post called "I summoned a demon successfully." They said, "So tonight I was speaking a mantra to Amen for the first time. I did for about 10 minutes. I've always been somewhat of a critic of it all, and nothing happened for the first 2 hours. About an hour ago to writing this, I was watching a video and had one earbud out and one in. I heard a growl with my ear that didn't have an earbud in it. Directly after, I got and still am completely ice cold and have goosebumps. It currently feels like someone is watching me, observing. I've absolutely never felt these kind of things before, just felt almost like a pinch on my left foot, and it is surrounding like there's movement coming from my kitchen. Am I angering it by sharing this? Oh my gosh, writing that question gave me a headache. It's going on and off the pain. It's now the morning after, and I had extremely weird vivid dreams, which I may have like 1 to 2 times a month, and I had around 4 I can recall. The most interesting, while frightening one, considered me and a friend driving somewhere I'd never seen before. We got out of our car along with everyone else for some reason. Suddenly it began raining in one specific spot in the middle of a bunch of trees. Immediately after, a volcano rose up from the ground in the distance and started spewing hellfire everywhere. The last moment I remember was fiery skies masked in smoke. I mean, it really felt like I was in hell. Number 6. this? Using prayer. This online user shared their story by saying, "I admit that I stupidly tried summoning a demon. Mostly, however, to have fun. I didn't think a demon would answer my call. Oh, and how they did. Within a matter of months, I was hearing birds talk to me. I thought I was crazy, but I checked in with many doctors, but they couldn't seem to figure it out. As it turns out, after checking with the pastor, we certainly were having demon problems. Dang, and these demons are not easy to get around either. They are tricky and sneaky, and the only way I lived through this was by prayer." Number 5. The Nobleman. Gilles de Rais was originally hailed as a hero of France for his role in the 100 Years' War, a time during which he served as a comrade in arms to Joan of Arc, but the nobleman Gilles de Rais lived a secret and gruesome second life, where he enjoyed torment and ending the lives of people who couldn't defend themselves. In September 1440, de Rais was arrested after an almost decade-long spree, during which he may have ended the lives of over 140 victims. During his trial, both de Rais and several of his servants' accomplices confessed to their evil deeds. Now, besides ending people's lives, he also admitted to engaging in Satanism by repeatedly summoning the devil and his demonic minions. While the nobleman refused to sell his soul, he offered the blood and organs of his victims in exchange for knowledge and power over the dark arts. Number 4. Devil Made Me Do It. Now, this story is more about accidentally getting possessed rather than summoning a demon, but I digress. Ed and Lorraine Warren helped exorcise a possessed boy named David Glatzel in the early 80s. Now, David's family had seen him being beaten and choked by invisible hands, and that red marks had appeared on his neck afterward. David had started to growl, hiss, speak in otherworldly voices, and recite passages from the Bible as well. Now, they did many exorcisms on David, and Lorraine said that David levitated, ceased breathing for a time, and even demonstrated the supernatural ability of precognition. Now, during his exorcisms, there was also a rocking chair in the room that would allegedly rock on its own, levitate, and even vanish and reappear. David and Lorraine also claimed to have seen the devil sitting in it. Now, Arnie Johnson was dating David's sister and was present for the exorcisms. In a desperate attempt to help David, Arnie coerced one of the demons to possess him while participating in David's exorcism. Afterwards, Arnie's personality changed. He would fall into a trance-like state where he would growl and hallucinate, but later have no memory of it. Then one day, after his girlfriend Debbie's landlord was drunk and misbehaving, Ernie ended his life. The day after the incident, Lorraine Warren informed Brookfield police that Ernie was possessed when the crime was committed. The case then went on to trial, where Ernie's defense was demonic possession and the devil made me do it. Now, the jury deliberated for 15 hours over 3 days before convicting Ernie of first-degree manslaughter. He was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison, though he only served 5. Number 3. The Codex Gigas. The Codex Gigas was published in the early 13th century and is written in Latin. The Codex Gigas is a Bible written in a monastery in Bohemia, modern-day Czech Republic. It is also referred to as the Devil's Bible due to a fully colored portrait of Satan taking up a whole page, and when I say a whole page, I mean a full 36-inch page. Yes, this is the largest illustrated medieval manuscript in the world, with a length of 36 inches, a width of 20 inches, and a total back-to-back thickness of almost 9 inches. Wow. Now, the page next to the illustration contains a full depiction of the kingdom of heaven, and there's lots of stories about this book, most likely stemming from the large portrait of the devil. According to the legend, the codex was written by Herman the Recluse, a monk who broke his monastic vow and was sentenced to be walled up alive. Now, in order to try to escape his dire fate, he promised to write a book that would glorify the monastery forever, a book that contained the entire knowledge of the universe. Now, Herman the Recluse was given one try to complete the book, and if he hadn't finished it by dawn, the sentence would be executed. Realizing by midnight that the task was impossible, Herman turned to the devil, who helped him finish the book for the price of his soul. Now, some say that Satan's portrait is his own signature, and others believe that Herman drew the portrait himself as a thanks. Number 2. No more summoning. When this user was asked if they've ever summoned a demon, they said, "Have done it, I don't do it anymore." He didn't have a physical body. Most summonings don't include actual physical forms. We had a mental conversation, and I used ghost writing to keep track of the convo. After the ritual, you're usually very drained of energy, and it's easy to forget details, so documenting is always a good choice. He was very polite, friendly, and even bantered with me. After around an hour of talk, I ended the session, and we never had any problems again. I contacted that specific demon one other time before stopping. Life is easier without demons. And coming in at number 1 is a conversation. This online user said, I spoke to 6 demons over 2 nights. I had no agenda in speaking to these demons. I didn't want to enlist their help with something or even to form a working relationship with them. I just wanted to meet them and interview them. I realized that they are not called demons for nothing. They are chaotic energies who exist to screw things up in various unique ways, and they are tricky. Just talking to them was a bit exhausting. At no point did I feel genuinely threatened, but I did feel unsettled or uncomfortable. If you decide to speak to them, keep your guard up. Don't let yourself say deal as a figure of speech, as one tried to make me do. Watch your words and watch their words too. I started mixing up who was saying what as I was writing the conversation down, which had never happened before, so I realized they were messing with me. I also made a strange Freudian slip, such as almost writing friends hurt each other instead friends trust each other. I noticed when these things happen. I told the spirits, hey, stop doing that, call them out on whatever they try to pull, and don't let them in, don't give them anything. Coming in at number 10 is Mother Teresa. Mother Teresa was an Albanian Catholic nun and the founder of Missionaries of Charity. Now everyone thought this woman was a saint helping the sick and poor, but as reported by the Times of India, Mother Teresa's true motives were actually kind of selfish, with less focus on helping people and more on boosting the numbers for her own religion. Now Mother Teresa's missions, despite having tons of charitable donations at their disposals, rarely if ever helped the poor sick people become healthy. In fact, most of those places, according to a 2013 paper published in Studies in Religion, were dirty, short on doctors, low on food, and didn't even have painkillers. Now nevertheless, Teresa found suffering beautiful, like it was making the world a better, holier place. She said there is something beautiful in seeing the poor accept their lot, to suffer it like Christ's passion. The world gains much from their suffering. But then when she got sick, she went to a modern hospital and received medicine to dull her pain as she didn't want to suffer. Kinda backwards, isn't it? Number 9. Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi inspired movements for civil rights and freedom across the world, but most of us don't know that Gandhi abandoned his wife to live with a rich male bodybuilder before he got involved in British-Indian relations. Now, if Gandhi was gay, who cares? But the problem is he tried to get all references to homosexual traditions erased from Indian temples in an act he called sexual cleansing. And to test his resistance to sexual temptation, he'd sleep in bed naked with young women, including his grandnieces. Yeah, gross. But worse than his sexual hypocrisy was his terrible racism. Gandhi may have wanted India freed from British rule, but he was perfectly happy with the rigid caste system of the nation. Gandhi wrote of a time when he and his followers were led to a lower caste jail for protesting. We could understand not being classed with the whites, but to be placed on the same level as the natives seemed too much to put up with. They are, as a rule, uncivilized, the convicts even more so. They're troublesome, very dirty, and live like animals, he said. Now, when asked about Indian views on race versus white South Africans, he wrote, "We believe as much in the purity of races as we think they do. Though Gandhi did bring some good to the world, it's important to know that he wasn't as great as he seemed."